Do you ever find yourself having a hard time remembering to do things? Remembering things in general? So find yourself needing to have a to-do list? You ever find yourself thinking you need a to-do list to remember to look at the to-do list? I think that's one of the things that we have a tendency to do is forget things very easily. We get very caught up in life, and the next thing we know, we've forgotten something. And it's very common. And as we get into things this morning, we want to start off looking in the Old Testament at Joshua chapter 4, verse 1 through 7, where we read, "When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, 'Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight.' So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, 'Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever.'" Okay. There are two major things that were happening that day. All right. First of all, if you would, God was confirming Joshua as Moses' replacement. Now, if you remember, if you were to go back through everything leading up to then, there were times where even Moses' leadership was challenged. Where there were those who tried to usurp Moses' leadership, including his own brother and sister along the way. And so at this point in time, it's become very important that God is establishing that, yes, Joshua is to be the replacement for Moses. And so that's one of the things that's taking place this day in history. As we read in Joshua 3:7, if you would, "And the Lord said to Joshua, 'Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses.'" And so that's one of the things that's taking place in this time frame of what we're looking at in Joshua. The other thing is that, well, the Israelites have been in the wilderness, 40 years? Well, the other thing that was happening is, if you would, the Israelites were officially entering the Promised Land. Finally, entering the Promised Land. So, as we're looking at these passages, what we see is happening is that God was going to part the waters once again, and so God commands stones to be set up as a memorial of that day to remind them of what He did. That He was going to part the waters, He's going to bring them into the Promised Land, that He was exalting Joshua, and so if you would, God confirmed Joshua as leader that day and brought the Israelites into the Promised Land like He had promised 430 years before. Remember, that promise went back long before Moses went and led the people out of Egypt. God promised 430 years before to Jacob that the day would come when his people would be brought back out of Egypt. And so they'd been in bondage for 430 years. And so the Israelites were to commit to memory what happened that day so that they could tell their children and their children's children and ensure that future generations would be told what happened. And so if you would, the stones were intended to spark curiosity and encourage questions so that day would not be forgotten. It was there for a purpose. It was a memorial to help them remember, and so that questions would be asked so that the information of what had happened would be passed from generation to generation. Now, memorials have been an important part of life from the earliest of times. Even the rainbow that we see, it's a memorial. It's a memorial of God's promise, His covenant with us, that He would never destroy the earth by water again. And if we go back into Genesis, we'd find that Jacob set up the stone he used as a pillow when he was running from Esau and had the dream of the ladder as a memorial. To remember that place, even to the extent of wanting to believe that God lived in that stone possibly. You see, if you would, they are put in place so that the memories and their importance can be passed down to future generations, because those things are considered to be very important, very critical. And so they come in various forms, from days set aside for celebration to monuments, and yes, even the gravestones we have are memorials, reminders of the people we were close to. And so our lives are filled with memorials each and every day. So many times we don't even realize that things that we are participating in or things that we are looking at are intended to be memorials. And we have a tendency to take them for granted. Sometimes they're little things. Sometimes they're big things. But yet our lives are filled with memorials. And so if you would, we have memorials so that we won't forget things, events, people, and milestones that are important. I mean, you can probably think of some personal memorials that you may have for your family or other things that you've participated in. I mean, even if we go out to the schools and we go through and we look in the trophy cases, what are the trophies? They're memorials. Memorials of when the team excelled. And so memorials are something that are very common. And this weekend, we are celebrating Memorial Day. It is a day that is set aside to remind us of the great cost of our freedom. See, our freedom as a nation was paid for by men and women who answered the call and gave their lives so that we could be free and remain free. And if you would, their blood lines the hallowed halls of time and cries out, "Remember. Remember what we've done. Remember our sacrifice for you so that you could enjoy the freedom that you have." We need to remember the price that was paid for our freedom. Don't squander it and throw it away so that their blood was not shed in vain. Arlington National Cemetery covers over 639 acres, or 259 hectares. And there are over 400,000 soldiers buried in Arlington alone. That's not to mention the hundreds of thousands buried in cemeteries throughout the world, set aside to commemorate those from the United States who died so that others could have freedom. As a matter of fact, there is a cemetery, I think it's just off of Normandy Beach, that families adopt a gravesite to take care of. They so appreciate what those men and women did for them that there is a waiting list of people wanting to take care of graves. Think about that. The appreciation. You see, if you would, their sacrifice was great, and we must never forget the price they paid for our freedom. That's why we've set this aside today. You know, many consider the Statue of Liberty to be the great memorial and monument of our freedom, don't they? I mean, everybody looks to the Statue of Liberty. But it pales in comparison to the hundreds of thousands of graves in which those are buried who gave their lives for the cause of freedom. You want a true monument, a memorial? That's where we would find it. If you would visit these cemeteries and walk the rows and read the names, many of them teenagers, never made it home, giving their lives, shedding their blood so that we could enjoy freedom. And so we must be careful to not allow those around us, the generations that are coming behind us, to throw away this great gift of freedom for which so many sacrificed their lives. And yet, even as we gather here today, there are millions across this great nation that would give it all away in the blink of an eye in exchange for comfort. To them, sadly, if you would, freedom isn't worth paying the price to keep it. It's not worth fighting for. And I think partially because I think a lot of the generation coming up has not seen what most of us have seen, has not lived through some of the things that we have lived through. They've become far enough away from these major events that they've become detached. And so as a result, they don't value the gift that we've been given. See, if you would, our freedom in this great nation has become little more than a cheap commodity not worth fighting for and preserving for future generations. Too many no longer cherish the gift that has been handed down to us over the last 245 years by those who have given their lives, shed their blood, so that we could be free and remain free. Little by little, they are allowing it to be taken away, not realizing what is happening. To them, Memorial Day has become little more than a day of fun and family cookouts and a break from the stress of the work week. It's a 3-day weekend. How could we allow ourselves to forget? How could we allow ourselves to become so self-absorbed that we would cease to remember and pass on to our children the understanding of just how precious and, yes, even sacred this freedom we were given truly is? And if you would, teach them to treasure it. As I look out across this great nation, as we look at all the strife and the struggle that we're facing, the real struggle is not a political struggle. It's a heart struggle. It's a sin struggle. It's a spiritual struggle. I'm convinced that one of the reasons that this nation is seeing our freedoms crumbling around it is because we've strayed so far from God. We've allowed ourselves to become comfortable in our faith, relaxed. We're no longer able to honestly sing "Onward, Christian Soldiers" when we're propped back in the pew, relaxed and comfy. We no longer hear songs such as "To the Work" or "Fight the Fight." We're comfortable with what a friend we have in Jesus, and enjoying the comforts of the freedom we've been given. And so I believe it's important today that we strive to bring our focus back to why this weekend is set aside. But I think we also need to understand and realize that the reason that this freedom we have is so precious and so much to be treasured is rooted in another historical event that brought an even greater freedom. And that was the day that Jesus gave his life as a sacrifice for our sin, so that we could be eternally free from the consequences of sin. Picture in your mind, if you would, the time was drawing near. And Jesus has gathered with his disciples to celebrate the Passover meal in the upper room that's been prepared. But this Passover celebration would be like no other for those gathered. The one they have come to finally believe is the Messiah takes upon himself the task of a lowly servant or slave and gets on his knees and washes his disciples' feet as they watch in confusion. He tells them, you don't understand right now, but you will. Then he begins the meal by taking the cup and dividing it among them. The cup that's going to be taken later. And then, as the meal is about to end, everything changed, as Jesus gave us the greatest memorial of all time. And then the next day, God's wrath was poured out on Jesus as he took our sin upon himself. So we read in Luke 23. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And when he had said this, he breathed his last. How horrible it would be if we were to forget and squander the freedom that our Lord sacrificed his life to give us. He gave us a memorial so that we would not forget, so that we would remember. And yet we find across this nation and churches everywhere, so few people observe the memorial. So few people desire to not forget. So many people, so self-absorbed, that remembering the greatest historical event of all time isn't worth their time. Other things are more important. Yet he gave us this memorial so that we would not forget, so that we would remember. And more than just remember, as the Apostle Paul recorded in 1 Corinthians, if you would, for I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, after he took the cup, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. You see, each week as we gather, our primary reason for gathering is a time of remembering, a time of telling what Jesus did for all who would believe and obey, a time of passing on the understanding and appreciation for what Christ did on the cross to the generations who come after us. These emblems that we partake of each week, they're more than just a memorial. They are a proclamation of what Christ has done. They are there to be used to pass on the faith to the next generation after us and to any who are not believers. As we impress upon them, as the bread represents his body broken for us. The fruit of the vine, his blood willingly shed for us. It is a time of proclaiming his sacrifice for us until the day he returns to take us to be with him. It's there to remind us so that we never forget. And so each week we observe the Lord's Supper, and as we do, we must keep in mind that it is a memorial that Jesus gave, a memorial to make sure that, if you would, we remember and not forget. See, it's more than the mechanics of our observance. It's more than just eating the bread and drinking the juice. If you would, it is our connection to his sacrifice through the symbols he gave. In the previous chapter of 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul tells us that we participate in his death, burial, and resurrection when we partake of the Lord's Supper. And so it is our connection to those events. And so it's more than just the mechanics. And yet, how often do we find ourselves when we come to the time of partaking of the Lord's Supper that we want to rush through it? Get on to what comes after. Almost to the extent that becomes a side note. And in some churches it has become a side note. The visible emblems have been taken from the forefront, moved to the back or off to a corner room where they're not seen. Almost as if we want to forget about the Lord's Supper and concentrate on other things. Push the memorial aside. Pull it down. Remove it from our sight. When it is intended to be there to remind us so that we don't forget. And it's there to be used as a tool to pass on what Christ has done to others. To help them to understand just how important His sacrifice was. It was the main focus of the early church when they gathered each week, and it needs to be our main focus. Some minister friends of mine posted online a little meme that I like. I've got a copy of it. I probably should have put it up here. And it's very true. The meme says, "The world drinks to forget. The Christian drinks to remember." And it's true. Today we gathered to remember Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection as He gave His life to set us free from sin and death. And tomorrow we remember those who gave their lives so that we could be free from tyranny and worship freely. Don't let the parties and family gatherings of this weekend overshadow the significance and importance of Memorial Day. And by the same token, I would say, don't let the things of this world overshadow the importance of the memorial we celebrate each week. Don't let the break from work detract from the significance and importance of our reason to gather. If you would, remember and never forget. Never, ever forget the price that was paid for our freedom as a nation, but even greater, the price that was paid for our freedom as children of God. As Jesus Christ paid the price for our sin with His own blood. Never forget. Remember. And I truly believe that the more that we focus on what has been given for us, the price that has been paid for us, the more we will strive to give our all for Christ, to serve Him more fully, to give our best for Him. For He gave His best for us, His life. Are you prepared to give your life to Him and for Him? Give Him your all. Do you need to take some time to do some remembering what He's done for you? Maybe make a few changes in your approach to things in this life.